Nebraska oil pipeline, because for 35 years they've been running oil through it, and it has so diminished the thickness of the pipe that they were getting leaks everywhere. This happens over a period of time because of the extreme pressure and the abrasive substances that are coming out of this pipe in the Gulf of Mexico. The thickness of the wall of that pipe is no longer 2 inches. It is all the way down to 1 inch now. And by the time they can plant a nuclear device, an angle drill, and put it in 3 to 4 months from now, they say as soon as they could possibly do anything about it, there will be no pipe. I mean, this is so drastic, folks. I sit here startled.
Meanwhile, there's fissures.
70,000 pounds per inch. There'll be no pipe there.
Meanwhile, there's fissures all over the ocean floor many miles away, leaking, so there's these fractures. And for those that just joined us, BP has now admitted, this is up on prisonplanet.com, they were aware of cracks in oil well 2 months before the explosion, and that they were giving orders to people on the well that the engineers said were dangerous. So just very reckless by BP. Now, getting into the toxicity, you say you were on a talk show in Florida, and that people were calling in saying they were sick. We know the workers in Mississippi, Louisiana, and Alabama are very sick. BP's tried to make them sign waiver forms. They're not even giving them the proper breathing apparatus they need because of the type of toxic chemicals that are off-gassing out of this oil.
Yes, that is the most dangerous part. You know, most people think that the only thing that comes out of an oil well is oil. No, quite to the contrary. There are many things that come out. And it depends on the field or the strata that they go into as to what will actually come out of that well. What is coming out of the well in the Gulf of Mexico? Now, the oil has kind of a reddish color.
All right, stay there. Stay there, Lindsey. Long segment coming up. We'll get into what's coming out of the well.
X.
All right, I'll be going into overdrive today for at least 20 minutes with Lindsey Williams so we can get into all this new info. I know in the last 20 minutes I've had him recap what he covered with us last week, and now he's going to get into the new developments from his sources. And then I'll also give you my perspective, and we're going to be taking your phone calls here in just a few minutes. Mark, Andrew, Alan, Grant, James, and others. The toll-free number to join us on air, dealing with the oil spill and the aftermath, 1-800-259-9231. But I have seen EPA scientists saying in some areas of the Gulf, there is toxic gases. You should move out of the area. We know they have moved National Guard in. There's been rumors of evacuation. But Lindsey Williams, you said you've been talking to Gulf radio shows you've been on, and I've been on a few myself, in Florida, in Mississippi, in Louisiana, in Alabama, and none of the people are saying they're being told to evacuate. But we saw what happened with Katrina, where they locked down the city, wouldn't let people get out, and then came for the guns. And so the government is capable of anything. My concern is if a hurricane does hit, and we're only about 2 months out from that, unfortunately, not only will you have the currents taking it out of the Gulf, around Florida into the Atlantic and dispersing it into a wider area, which is still a problem, but at least it's a larger mass area that'll be in, more diluted, more time to break down through regular biodegrade that oil is very susceptible to. But that the hurricanes are going to drive all that oil, most of it out in the ocean, up on the beaches with the chemicals that it's off-gassing, and so that could trigger just a disaster of unprecedented proportions here in North America. They have had similar things happen in the Gulf and at different regions around the Middle East. It's happened in Indonesia. So they have had other big oil spills, but this one is starting to rival those. So continue with the toxicity issue, and then any intel you've got on moves for forced evacuations, because I saw these reports 2 weeks ago, and I called the towns it was supposedly happening in. I called hotels. I called 7-Elevens. People said, no, there's no troops here. Now, some areas said there's troops here, but there's no evacuation. So, Lindsey, continue, and then we're going to go to phone calls.
Well, Alex, you mentioned a subject a moment ago that I need to briefly touch on so they'll understand the magnitude of this whole thing. Senator Bill Nelson appeared on, he's a Democrat from Florida, he appeared on MSNBC with Andrea Mitchell on the 9th of June. And he said oil is seeping up from the seabed. Just after that, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, who has been denying that the NBP, both, for all of this time, has been denying that there are any leaks coming out at other places in the ocean. That means plumes of oil coming up that somehow escaped from that pipe, because undoubtedly that big pipe was perforated at the time this humongous amount of pressure hit it, 20 to 70,000 pounds per square inch. They just admitted to it. This is by Chris Baltimore from Houston, Texas. It was on Reuters News on June the 8th, and they said, experts are investigating and report admitting oil plumes estimating from the BP's pig-stricken oil well in the Gulf of Mexico, and they say that these plumes are appearing as much as 20 miles away. Did you catch that? Folks, do you realize that 25 to 30,000 feet down, that big 2-inch thick hardened pipe, steel pipe, has undoubtedly burst? And these plumes are working their way out up through the bottom of the ocean, and they now are for the first time admitting that they're there. Even if they stop the pipe itself from flowing, how many plumes do they have out there that they're going to stop too? Now, Matt Simmons is a very well-respected person in the oil industry.
And they may have hit a level where it's abiotic, where it's basically unlimited. We know many of the old oil wells are now filling back up, and more petroleum geologists and scientists do believe that it is abiotic, being made in the earth. You can find some small deposits of the oil as we know it that has particuli from animals in it, dead prehistoric creatures, fossils, coal that has the imprint of ferns in it. So we know there is some fossil fuel that is based on dead life and swamps, but more and more the evidence shows that most oil is abiotic, being produced down in the earth. And what if they've hit a new strata and this sucker just keeps pumping for years? Then we could have a problem, which is biblical in proportions.
Alex, Matt Simmons said just this week, 25,000 barrels of oil are being released per day. Now, he's the first one to come out with a figure this big. You remember my sources said there were so many gallons per day. Matt Simmons says it's 25,000 barrels per day. Now, the reason I gave that figure first before I gave the ones about what's coming out with the oil is because you've got to understand the magnitude of the immensity of what's coming out of that well, to the point that it comes all the way to the surface in a geyser type thing from all the way down 5 miles, 5,000 feet. Now, coming up with that oil, the Environmental Protection Agency just gave these statistics the other day. I'm going to read them to you. My goodness, they are so startling. Coming up with the oil are these gases. They are toxic. They are flammable. If we had a hurricane, Lord have mercy, I cannot imagine the respiratory problems and the health problems that are going to develop all the way up the east coast of America as these gases are taken there. People are already sick in Florida, as I mentioned from the radio show I was on yesterday in Orlando, Florida, where the talk show host himself said, I've been wanting to throw up for 3 days. Now, here they are. The EPA said that hydrogen sulfide is coming out of that well. Now, I'm going to give you what they allow as the allowable limits for a person to breathe and be safe. 5 to 10 parts per billion. Please write these letters down. P, T, B as in boy. The current tested levels of hydrogen sulfide are 1,200 parts per billion. This is staggering. And they aren't telling people about this. The mothers who are carrying babies, unborn, do you know what this is going to do to them? Can you have the slightest idea of the health defects that are going to develop from this? The next one is benzene, and this one really frightens me. Benzene is toxic. Benzene is a carcinogen. Benzene causes cancer. The safe level, benzene is so dangerous that the Environmental Protection Agency only allows 0 to 4 parts per billion to be contacted by a human being.